there's always going to be a breakdown on the other side. There's always going to be, like you said,
100%.
that block on the other side where you're going to have to combat those negative feelings and those negative thoughts, or something's going to come at you that you're going to have to face. And it's so great that if you have those tools in your toolbox to say, okay, I'm going to sit in this for a moment, but I'm not going to wallow in it. Because before I
Mm-hmm.
would not sit, I would wallow. And I would
Mm.
wallow, I'd be one of those little pigs in the mud, swallowing around in the mud. I would just wallow in it, and I would just get stuck, and I wouldn't know how to get out.
Welcome to The Ownership Game with Gary Montalvo. What would it take to get into the driver's seat of your life and leave your mark? The Ownership Game starts now.
Today we speak with author Melissa Vera, the founder of the lifestyle blog Adventures of a Frugal Mom. I thought it'd be interesting to learn from Melissa how she became a blogger. But what I thought was going to be a straightforward interview about her entrepreneurial journey quickly turned into a vulnerable and deeply intimate conversation about grief, learning to love yourself, and healing generational trauma. So, Melissa, talk to me about how you came up with the idea for Frugal Moms. How did that idea come to birth?
Actually, it's kind of funny. I had a friend of mine who was actually, we were both school teachers, and she was like, "You're doing everything that I'm doing, but I'm making money doing it," talking about saving money with coupons and deals and things like that. She said, "You need to start blogging." And I'm like, "I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that." And so finally, she convinced me to start doing it, and I did it. And it was like, okay, I like this, but I don't like the competition with the deals and coupons, because there's so much competition out there with that. And if you're not right
You
there,
competition from other people doing that like
yeah,
type of content? Is that what
competition.
you mean? Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
competition from other blogs doing that. Because if you're not right on the deal when it posts, and you're not one of the
Uh-huh.
first ones to
That's
post,
a lot of
then you're
pressure.
not getting anything else on it. So I said, you know what? I really enjoy writing. English was my major in college, English and communications. So I'm like, you know what? Let me just start just kind of branching out. And at the time, my three girls were young, and I was like, okay, I need to start telling people that there are things that you can do with your kids that won't cost a lot of money, because
Mm-hmm.
we always brought our girls up to believe that if you want something bad enough, that you either work for it or find a way to get it without it costing you a whole lot of money. And so that's where Frugal Mom started. Now, originally when I started the blog, I had this in my mind, like, Adventures of Frugal Mom. It's like, okay, it's a super mom, flying through the air like Superman, and just like everything. So that's where Frugal Mom came from. And it slowly but surely evolved into a lifestyle brand. And when I was doing it, I started in 2011, but I didn't really go full time until 2014. And that is
Okay.
something that, when the bottom fell out of my world, I didn't think I could ever do this again. I didn't know where directions my life was going to be going. And then God just opened up a door and said, "Hey, you need to do this full time." And I've done it full time since 2014, 2015 actually.
That's amazing. So, you dropped something there that I think we need to go back to. You said the bottom fell out of your world. Talk to me.
Yes.
What happened there? What do we?
Okay. 2014 was, like, I would say, was the most trying period of my life. I mean,
Uh-huh.
lost my sister already, and I lost her when I was 9 months pregnant with my oldest daughter. But in 2014, my youngest daughter, who is now 21, was in sixth grade, had her first of many seizures that year. We didn't know what was going
Mm.
on. We thought at one point it was a brain tumor. And we finally got her back on the right track to where she was going back to school on the medication and everything. It turned out to be epilepsy. But then we had a car accident, and of course, Mama gets sick, and Mama gets hurt in the car accident. So I was out of work for the longest time. So I was slowly but
Mm.
surely, but it was my shoulder was hurt. So, when you're typing on a computer, it's hard when you have to type with both hands, how hard it is. And
Yeah.
then when I
You,
finally overcame that, and this is probably the thing that rocked my world the most that year, was my dad, who was my biggest hero. I mean, my biggest supporter, encourager. I strive to be like him in this world. He was put in hospice care, and he ended up
Mm.
dying from exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam and the tainted water in Camp Lejeune. And so it just, like I said, the bottom fell out, and I didn't know which way to turn. And my dad was such a big supporter of me in my teaching career, and he would always come in and help and volunteer and do a lot with the elementary school that I was teaching at, that
Mm.
I just could not go back and face the hallway without remembering, and I just couldn't face his memories at that point. So that's when I said, okay, if this is what I'm supposed to be doing, then I'm going to do this full time. And that's what happened.
Wow. Wow, that's really fascinating because during your weakest time, right? Like the biggest pain and the biggest struggle, you kind of took the biggest leap
Yep.
because, switching careers and you could have gone to another school, you could have
Hmm.
done something else, but that's really interesting that you chose to make such a transformation out of like at the lowest point of your life.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, honestly, I was doing it on the side from 2011, but I was like, you know what? If this is what I'm meant to be, I'm going to take a year, do this full time. And if this is what God and what I'm supposed to be doing, then it's going to happen. It's going to make a way. And it happened 2014, 2015 is when I went full time with it. 2018, I actually went to a place, a storage shed building place. I call this my blog cabin. I'm in my blog cabin right now. And I used money from what I made blogging to purchase the storage buildings. And anybody who's ever looked at storage building know they can run up to like $5,000 to $10,000 up easily for any storage building. And so I went and purchased it, and I designed everything inside the blog cabin, and my husband did the sweat equity, did all the hard work. And I do give him credit for that. But I paid for every bit of material and paid for the blog cabin too. And so that was just something that I knew continuing on that I was going to be able to do. I was going to be able to come out here write, because if you're a writer or if you're a podcaster or anything, you have to have a set place to work, or else something in the house is going to call you. Laundry, dirty dishes, the dog, the kids, everything. But if you know you're out in your little office, in your little space, it helps you become more creative. And it opened me up in so many ways that I never thought I would have ever expected it to open up.
Wow. Tell me, so it sounds like you had no idea what this was when you first started. Like your friend was just like, you should do this.
Mm-hmm.
Did like, and I think that one of the things that often stops people is the not knowing how,
Mm-hmm.
or the thinking they have to have it all figured out when, in order to get going. I think it'd be kind of interesting if you can share some of your experience in that and just finding your way as you were launching this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest obstacle I had was trying to get out of my own way, because we get in our heads, we have that inner critic
Hmm.
that always talks, oh well, you can do this, but really, can you really do this? Or, oh, I want to do this, but really, there's always that but in our heads. And that was
Yeah.
my biggest obstacle, was my head. I had to get out of my own headspace. And there's an adage that says life begins outside your comfort zone. And I 100% agree with that, because life did not begin the way that I am living now until I got out of my comfort zone and I took that leap. Even though I was still mourning, everything that I had lost the year before, I knew that if I didn't do something and didn't make some changes, that I was going to be stuck, and I was
Mm.
going to be stuck. And I've not only have I worked on myself emotionally, physically, spiritually, but also worked in navigating and building the brand bigger and better as well. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, and how did you tackle the like not knowing what to do? Like what was kind of your process for figuring it out and breaking it into
First of all,
steps?
day by day, I didn't ever look. I try not to look too far ahead in the very beginning, because I
Mm.
knew if I set a goal, and a lot of people set really massive goals, and I knew if I did not hit that goal, that I was going to be upset because I didn't hit the goal, and then I would be down
Mm-hmm.
on myself even more. So
Mm-hmm.
I try to take everything day by day, do little steps, and try to at least do one new skill or go to one uplifting, inspirational speaker workshop or one thing that empowered me and helped me involved as a person. And then that just led to bigger and better growth. I had to feed into myself, and I had to
Mm.
absolutely take those negative thoughts out and start replacing them with positive thoughts for myself. And that was hard for me because I, youngest of four girls, I was always the smallest. I was always the one that her voice was never heard. And I always felt
Mm.
like the imposter syndrome was huge in my life. And
Yeah.
so for me to actually take those steps forward one day at a time, when I realized that I had to do it one day at a time and taking one giant, instead of taking one giant leap and then expecting quick results, I knew I had to slowly and steadily build a business. And when I interviewed my girls a couple years ago, because I have three girls, somebody asked them, "What did you learn from your mom?" And they said, "We learned that you can build something from nothing, that it takes
Mm.
perseverance and persistence to go through and not to just give up." Because in the beginning, yeah, I maybe had maybe 10 people following the brand, and then now you look at it, there's it's grown exponentially. And not only do I have that, I have the podcast, I have YouTube channels now. I hosted a DIY show for a major market last December, October through December. So it's just, I'm taking opportunities as they come, and I'm just saying, okay, I'm just going to go with it. Because when you
Yeah.
start thinking about your opportunities and you start thinking about what could go wrong instead of what could go right, that's when you start realizing that you're passing things by, when you should be living your life and not letting life pass you by.
Yeah. I love that you said that because in my experience, people often, when they're starting things out, have this expectation that it's just like they have this expectation to just hit a home run.
Hmm.
And I get it because I'm kind of that same personality too. I catch myself wanting to hit a home run without ever holding a bat, without ever like
Oh,
practicing. But it's really not like that. And one of the things that people often take for granted is the amount of mindset work that you have to do, right? Because
yep.
not only are you reinventing yourself and rediscovering yourself newly, but you're up against all the stuff that you've never done before, right? So there's a lot of learning. So that's always humbling. That's always um insecure, a little insecure because you don't you just don't know it, right? It's new.
Right.
And your mind starts to mess with you, man. Like you really start to mess with you. So I love that so much of your success really when you were starting out was being very intentional about the way that you were feeding your mind, feeding your spirit, feeding yourself, nurturing yourself, right? Like that's always I always use the example of a baby learning how to walk. Like if a baby fell, you wouldn't be like, "Oh, come on. How could you
Mhm.
you're supposed to just walk," which is what we do to ourselves all the time. But that you were being very nurturing to yourself and making sure that you had positive reinforcement and things that inspired you. It's such a great lesson that I think people often overlook.
Yep, I
You know?
agree. And you hit on something when you said mindset. I actually, after I realized I went as far as I could go in my own mind, I reached out to a friend of mine who was a mindset coach and worked with her for a
Mm.
while. And then when I realized, when I start going through stuff and I think, oh, I'm back in that stinking thinking again, I re up and look for another mindset coach to work with. I
Mm.
try to, because there are different mindset coaches that people can work with, that they may not be the greatest fit or maybe what you need at that particular time in your life. And so I think it's great that people that want to reach out and work with coaches and mindset coaches, because it it unblocks my creativity and just makes my creative juices flow so much better when I'm like working with someone one on one. And it may not be for a whole year, it may just be for a period of like 2 months, 3 months, whatever. But it's so inspiring to me and unblocks my creativity and allows me to take my business off into another different realm that I never even thought of, because it's great when you have someone there listening to you and then they're giving you that feedback that maybe it's not something you thought about you should be doing, but you realize that's something that you should be doing. So it's always
Yeah.
great to get feedback.
Yeah. No, and it makes sense because the moment that you climb a step, you find yourself at the bottom of the next one.
Hmm.
And the work that I do a lot with people is in helping them grow their mindset around their business and in helping them grow their business. And what I often say is like the mindset to hit $100,000 is different to hit $200,000 to hit three, and I mean, to hit your first 25 or $50,000 is it requires a breakthrough, And I remember for myself years ago when I had like my first major breakthrough, right? After years of struggling and trying to get the business going, I hit a plateau around like 150. I got stuck there for a while, and I was working with my coach, and they're like, "Okay, well, what's the goal? What do you wanna?" And I kept saying, "I don't know. I just want to make enough. I just want to make enough, Like I just want to be able to do a little traveling and pay the bills." And then it was like this big aha moment because I realized I'm like, "Oh, yeah, no wonder you're stuck. You had hit enough a while ago. You had already
Hmm.
hit your level of aha." And so I had to start to create a new game that inspired me, and it was like, "Oh, what if I could pay off my parents' retirement home, right? Or what if I could pay my brother's school loans?" Like things, because I've never really been like very driven by money. I mean, don't get me wrong. Money's nice. We need money. I'm not like, but it's never. I've always just loved what I do, and I wanted to make an impact. So for me, creating a game like that, um, really allowed me to create a bigger container for money. So it's again another really great tip. Because I do find people get stuck because they feel like, well, I had a breakthrough already. I should be okay now. It's like, no, 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 no. You had that breakthrough in that particular moment in time. Like, 6 months from now, a year from now, it's time to have it again, or slightly different, or at a different level with a different twist, with a different flavor. So I love that. Another great tip.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you use breakdown, because I mean breakthrough is because one of the coaches that I worked with said that once you hit a breakthrough, there's always going to be a breakdown on the other side. There's always going to be, like you said,
100%.
that block on the other side where you're going to have to combat those negative feelings and those negative thoughts, or something's going to come at you that you're going to have to face. And it's so great that if you have those tools in your toolbox to say, okay, I'm going to sit in this for a moment, but I'm not going to wallow in it. Because before I would not sit, I would wallow. And I would
Mm,
wallow. I'd be one of those little pigs in the mud, swallowing around in the mud. I would just wallow in it, and I would just get stuck, and I wouldn't know how to get out. And I would
yeah.
just be content being stuck, and that's not. And I was a miserable person because I was stuck. And so once I realized, okay, I'm going to sit in a moment, I'm going to give myself grace, but then I'm going to get up and move on to the next thing. Now, a moment may be 1 or 2 days, it may be half an hour, it may be a week. It just depends on what I'm going through at the time, what
Yeah.
else is happening in my life. But I give myself grace to feel the feelings, go what I want to do, go through what I'm going through, and know that it's not going to be like this all the time. And that was hard in the beginning. It was hard that I always thought, oh, here are all these people that are making all this, getting so many page views, so many this, so many that, and
Mm-hmm.
here I am building my brand, and it wasn't what I thought it was to begin with, like the Coupon and Deals blog, and that's why it morphed more into a lifestyle blog, because I just felt like this is where I needed to be. I needed to take my writing to another level, and that's what I
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. Beautiful. I There was something I wanted to go back to there, but I forgot. So let's talk about your some of the things that you love writing about. Like, what are your, I guess, like, it'd be kind of cool. Like, give me a couple of highlights. Like, what are the ones that you've been like, oh, that was a good one, or I really like love that one.
Okay, can you repeat that? Because you cut out.
Yeah, no worries. Hold on, let me make a note of that for the editing. Um, so I love to hear what are some of the your most favorite blogs. Like, what were some of the favorite things that you've written about that you're like, oh yeah.
Um, Most of my favorite ones are the ones where it's like personal revelations where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm sitting here writing and I thinking I'm gonna write one post and it turns out to be totally 180
Mm,
of what I'm gonna write because once I sit down and my fingers start walking on the keyboard, it's like, no, this is the way the post is not gonna it's supposed to go.
mm,
And I heard a lot of people say that my voice is so unique that that's the reason why it doesn't matter the numbers. It matters that my voice is so unique and I'm writing to the just one person. I'm writing to the person whose voice was never heard. I'm writing to the person who struggles with feelings and is not able to voice them. I'm writing to that person, and I think the most
mm.
personal ones are the ones that are my favorite. But I also have to do a plug. I also have a 13-year-old Shih Tzu named Allie, and I write all the dog pet articles, which she hasn't written in a while, in her voice. So they're absolutely my favorite because I can be a little sassy with those, and she's very sassy. So
It's really funny. What's your process like in terms of like your creativity, or how do you plan? Is it instinct? Do you like plan it for a couple of weeks? Like how do you work?
I wish I could say I was a planner, but I'm not a planner. I'm a procrastinator. Um, Now, if I know there's something big coming up and I know I'm going to be away, then I try to plan out. Like when I had to have surgery for my shoulder, when in 2014, I planned out posts so I would have something going up every day.
Mm,
But most of the time, it's procrastinator, and it's most of the time it's when I'm sitting down and I feel led to write. Like an idea will just pop in my head, and I'll just feel led to
mm,
write about it. Like I have a whole list of ideas now that my husband and I just came back from a cross country trip. We went from North Carolina to California, and then California to North Carolina
nice.
back for celebrating our 30th years of being together. And during that time, I would write down a whole bunch of things I wanted to write about the trip, but not have I written them? No, but I do have ideas down in a book that eventually I'll get to them, but who knows? Right now I'm playing catch up on emails, so
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Something that I wanted to is something that you said that kind of stood out that I love is there's just a level of grace that you give yourself in you said the time that I give myself, maybe 30 minutes, maybe 2 minutes, and maybe 2 weeks, like depending on where you are. And even now, it's how you're speaking, there seems to be a level of grace, about, oh, I haven't written. And I think that's interesting to talk about because the self judgment very often takes people out of the game. It's one of the things that I see a lot.
yeah.
And I'm curious, was it always that way for you, or is that a result of just the experience of you, doing this for so many years, and how did that come about?
It was definitely the result of doing it for so many years because in the beginning I would sit down and I would not be able to do anything. I would just like think about all the things I didn't get done and didn't get accomplished, and I would say, well, why even bother? Why even try? And working with mindset coaches, like I said, and within the last, I say, 5 years or so, I was like, okay, you know what? I need to give myself grace. And it wasn't until, let's see, what, 2020, 2019, 2020 is when I actually started giving myself grace and started
Mm,
working with coaches and saying, okay, this is okay. I'm gonna feel the feeling, then I'm gonna get up and move on. But before I used to wallow and stay in it and stay in the muck and just not and just feel so blocked creative wise. And then I wish I had learned it earlier and gave
mm,
myself grace earlier because I could look back and say, oh my gosh, where would I be now if I had done that? But then again, I think there's a process we all go through, and everybody goes through a process differently, and your
yeah,
process may be different than my process. So maybe I needed to go through that all that stuff to get to where I am right now.
yeah. Perfect. And I think that's part of the grace, understanding that because stuff is happening and our instinct is to resist it
Yep.
and to push it back and to go, why is this happening? What's wrong? But very often there's a gift in it at the other end, right? Like there's always a lesson. There's always something that I've been really working on asking myself a lot is what is this here to teach me?
Yep.
Right? Like what is this here to teach me? Because it's here to teach me. And when I step into that and I drop into my heart and I just listen and ask the question, very often I hear something back. It's like, okay, I'm here to learn patience right now. Okay, got it. I'm
Yep.
here to I'm here to learn how to step into my power and responsibility. Okay, got it. And you may not always like it, but that's the lesson.
Agree. And then once you take that thinking from negative to that positive thinking, you can see the whole switch in your whole life too. When you start thinking of, like you said, what is this teaching me? That's the positive out of that. You're
Hmm.
taking that negative that you're going through and creating a positive. And I think what everybody who has a positive outlook on life, if you look at them, a lot of them may be going through a lot, but they're able to come and they're able to smile and say, okay, now I've gone through this. Now what else can I do? And you
Yeah.
see most of the people that have been successes in the world have gone through that, but the outlook and the way they created their own reality from their outlook and from their mindset is how they got able to go further and further in life.
Yeah. I love that. So, what's next for Adventures of a Frugal Mom? What are you working on now? Like, what are your next goals?
I am actually working on writing a book. I do not
Hmm.
have the greatest relationship with my mom. Being the youngest of four girls, I already said my dad was my hero. And so I'm writing a book about how, sometimes, you know, we struggle with parents. I think we all have parental struggles, no matter what we go through. But we learn also from our parents. I learned from my mom how not to be the mom to three girls that she was the mom to me. I mean, she
Mm.
favored, and I will agree, and I understand the reason why she favored the two oldest girls was because my dad was deployed when those two were born, and she had them for such a long period of time when it was just her and them. And then when my
Mm-hmm.
sister Karen and I came along, we were like, okay, dad's home, he's retired. And so we were more dad's kids, even though had the same set of parents, how parents tend to kind of like, oh, he's my favorite or she's my favorite, even though we're not supposed to have favorites. Um, so I'm writing a book about my relationship with her and how it was, my faith showed me that some of the things before where I thought was rejection was actually only her way that she's coping with it, how she
Mm.
coped. And I learned also from her that I wanted to be the type of mom that my girls could come to me with anything and talk to me about. Whereas I knew if I went to my mom and talked about anything, she would say, oh, that didn't happen, or it's all in your head, and that kind of negative thought process because that's what she learned. And so that's what I'm writing a book about because she just passed away in August, and I swore to myself that I
Mm.
would not write anything out of respect for her until she died. And then once
Mm.
she died, I was going to, okay, my story is finally going to get told because I had to put a boundary around the family that I grew up with after my dad passed away because I just could not handle the negative, the toxic stuff coming off of them that they just assumed was normal everyday stuff. But to me, it was
Mm.
very toxic and took a toll on me emotionally and physically. And so I just had to say, no, no more. I'm there. I love you, but I can't be around you all the time. I can't because that was just too much. And so I decided when she passed that I was going to write a book about it and how it led me to the unconditional love. And it's a Christian based book, but it's led me to the unconditional love of God. Knowing that I'm just as good as myself as I was her daughter. No matter what, I still deserve to be loved. There's no conditions behind being loved. Everybody should be loved unconditionally, but a lot of times there's a lot of conditions and like if you do this for me, then
Mm-hmm.
I'll love you more. If you don't do this for me, then I won't love you at all. Or I'll take something away or I'll punish you for that. And so, working on myself with this mindset for the last couple of years, I learned that I can only control the way I react to situations. And
Yeah.
so, like I said, I waited until after she died to start writing the book because I did it out of respect for her, but I also want my story to be told. And I think that's important that people tell their stories. Their stories are valid. People need to tell their truths, tell their stories, even the messy and the muck, because there's somebody out there that is struggling just like you are. There may be a little girl right now or a teenager who's struggling with her mom, and she picks up the book when it's finally published and says, "Oh my gosh, I'm not the only one that had a relationship like this with my mom." I mean, because I used to
Yeah.
mourn the fact that I didn't have a relationship with my mom at all.
Wow, that's really deep. It's really heavy. And I think a lot of people can relate to having to make that difficult decision and navigating that, right? And how do you setting up boundaries with people that you love and people that are your family, and having to navigate that. How if I can ask, how's your relationship with your sisters? Did that impact you guys? Like,
The sister that was closest to me in age, she died when I was 6 months pregnant with my oldest daughter, and it's coming up on her anniversary of her death. And so it was hard because she was the one she was my best friend. She was the one that always hung out with me. We always did things together. We always talked about, how we felt like we were different and treated differently from mom and everything else. And so when I lost her, the bottom fell out, but I still had my dad. And then once I lost my dad, it was like, okay, my mom had those two older sisters, and there was me by myself. And then the year before my mom passed, my oldest sister passed away in her sleep. So I only have one sister now. But she's the type of person that she's not willing to see her fault in anything that goes on in life. And so I'm willing to take my part of the blame, but I told her I can't take all the blame anymore. I can't take it on. There's two sides to every story, and there's two sides to everything in life. And she needs to start, saying, okay, compromise, because that's important. But I learned early on with my sister, the one that just passed, the oldest one that passed away, is if I had something that I wanted to say to her, if I waited instead of reacting in the moment, which is what the old Melissa used to do before the mindset coaching, if I waited in the moment and if I reacted in the moment, that it was going to be nasty, ugly words, and neither one of us would be happy about it. But I learned to sit on it for a while. And then when the time opened up for me to talk about it, I was a much more confident and calmer person when I talked about it.
yeah,
So it's the other sister, the one that's still alive, tends to react in the moment, and I want to react back to her. And I find myself sometimes thinking, oh, no, I'm not snapping back. You know how, because a lot of people, when people say something nasty to you, you'll snap right back. But I've learned, I'm like, no, I can only tell my truth. And my truth is, okay,
yeah.
I'll take part of the blame, but I'm not taking all the blame.
It's so funny how we do all this work, and we do all this work on ourselves. We do all the therapy, all the coaching, all the stuff. But then these family triggers, they put us right back. It's like, ah.
For sure, 100% sure.
It's like those are the hard ones, man. That I just kind of stay with you on some level forever, man. Um. So the as you're speaking, the thing that I became really relevant to is you've had a lot of loss. You've actually experienced a lot of loss in your life.
Yep.
Like there's a lot of grief like that you have had to process.
Yep.
Um,
I mean, my first experience with death was in 1983 when my maternal grandmother died in February, and then in August of that same year, lost my paternal grandmother, and they were both the only grandparents I had in my life. So I lost both grandmothers in the same year, and that was hard because it was my first
yeah.
experience. I was in eighth grade, ninth grade, my first experience ever with death, because I never really experienced going to a funeral or anything else. I was very lucky because I didn't experience that until that time. But then looking back now, I just can't imagine. I see people now who have grandparents and great grandparents, and I think I just talked about this with my oldest daughter. She's like, people that still have their grandparents around or their great grandparents around, and they don't take time to spend with them. It's hard to, because hey, you're lucky. I don't have any, she doesn't have any grandparents now. I mean, we've lost not only my husband's parents, but both of my parents have gone. And so
Wow.
it's really hard. And grief is hard. And grief is different for different people, and it's also different for how you grieve for people in your life. Because I remember having a conversation with my youngest daughter after my mom passed away, and I said, I feel guilty because I'm not grieving her like I grieved my dad, like I grieved Grampy, I told her. And she said, and my youngest is 21, soon to be 22, so she's super smart for her age. And she says, Mama, you are not grieving Nana because you had a different relationship with her. She says, I said, should I feel relieved or should I be guilty because I don't grieve as much? She said, because you had a different relationship with her mama. With Grampy, you had that relationship where if he didn't see you or didn't hear from you, he would be driving by the house all the time. He would come in, eat popcorn, hang out for a few minutes, and go on. But he would always make the time to stop. Whereas my mom always felt like we had to go to her. And so, and once she said that, it framed my mind. Yeah, that's right. Because to this day, I still grieve my sister that passed away in 94, and my dad, he passed away in 2015. I just grieved them hard. But my mom and my sister, yeah, I still wish they were around. I wish I could have said some things, and I had a little bit of regret for not kind of clearing the air. But I know that the relationship wasn't there for me to be able to do that with them. And
Yeah.
so I still grieve my dad and my sister, but my mom and my older sister, with my mom died, it was almost like a relief because I'm like, she's finally back with my dad because they've been married for would have been 55 years when my dad died. And so she had known him since she was 11 years old. And so for me, I felt like it was such a weight because I knew she was with my dad. I knew she was back with him, and that was her happiest place in her life. And with my sister Sherry, I grieved for the life that she didn't have because she didn't have a lot in her life. And it just made me so sad to see that. And so, like I said, you grieve in different ways at different times, but you also grieve for people differently too. And it's because of the impact they make on your life. And my dad is, like I said, has made the biggest impact in my life. He's the one that I always think about when I go to give back. I always do something on his birthday to give back. I always donate books to little free libraries, and inside I put in loving memory and put his name in there and everything, and I always stick him whenever I get a book. I stick in a little free library so that his legacy can live on as well.
Yeah. So I think you have grieved your mom. It's just you started grieving her earlier. I mean, it's you were grieving her when you were alive, when she was alive, right? Because that
Hmm.
relationship, or even if it was a relationship that you wanted with her, had to be grieved at some point. So I do think you have grieved her. It's just been different. With your dad, it's like a all of a sudden, situation. But with your mom, it was like a lifetime of grieving in some regards, right?
Yep, I totally agree because, like I said, it was almost like a weight was lifted off my shoulder when she died. It was like,
Mm,
oh, I don't have
yeah.
that judgment anymore. I don't have that, oh, if you don't love me, you don't love me if you don't do X, Y, and Z for me. And I'm like, I do love you, but I can't do X, Y, and Z for you. I remember one of the conversations I had with her. She had called and needed a ride to the doctor. And at that point, I suffered from really debilitating migraines. And I had just taken some migraine medicine. And I physically could not have gotten in the car and driven. And
Mm-hmm.
she took it upon herself to just blow up at me and just say, wow, why would you care anyways? And I'm like, Mom, I would if I physically could get out and do this. But I physically cannot get out and do this because, number one, when I drive, I just could not, you know, on medicine, I'm already loopy if you give me a little bit of Benadryl. Can you imagine what it's like with a migraine medicine that's supposed to knock you out, being able to drive? It's hard.
Yeah. Okay, so you started writing this book to tell your story. Um, how's the process different? I mean, this is a lot more emotional than the content that you've been dealing with in your blog. But I imagine yeah. Talk to me about the difference in the process, because I would imagine it's a big difference.
It is a big difference. And I find myself, and I knew when I was writing this, when I started writing the book, I knew my words were coming off harsher than what I wanted to be. And so I decided, it goes back to finding help when you're struggling with something, finding help. So I decided that, you know what, I needed other eyes on what I'm writing at the time. So I actually joined a mastermind. They only allowed 10 people in. So I joined this mastermind. First meeting was actually today, and they're going to help me.
Mm.
There are two writers who are going to help me become a better writer, because I knew that the way my words were coming off right now was really harsh because there was a lot of anger, and I don't want to focus on the anger in this book. I want to focus on the redemptive value of knowing that you can find yourself, even though you're struggling with parental relationships or marriage relationships or any kind of relationship, that you still deserve to be able to be loved unconditionally, even if it's you only love yourself unconditionally. Because self-love is important, and a lot of people think that self-love is selfish, but it's not. It's a way for you to present yourself better to the world. It's a way for, not only do you love yourself, then that love ebbs and flows and goes out and waves to the people around you. So I think it's important that, I needed, when I was writing, started writing the book, that it was coming off harsher than what I wanted, that I
Yeah.
sought help for that. And so
Yeah.
I think, because there's a lot of emotions, and there's times where I'm like, okay, I can't. I've written all I can today. I can't do any more. I can't process. But I do write myself little notes. Okay, go back and do this, or go back and write about this, in the little sidebar of the text from the doc that I use. But it's hard, especially when you're going through and you're reliving all the things that happened in your life, and you're
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, I've come this far. Whereas before I
Mm-hmm.
would say, wow, I was treated this way. Why am I even on this earth? But now it's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
wow, I can look at this and realize how far I've come with this. So,
Yeah. I and I want to acknowledge you because I can, obviously what you're sharing, the struggle and you trying to navigate the emotion and the hurt and the pain that's still there um with your sense of responsibility and with your sense of wanting to not speak poorly, like you know what I mean, like
hmm
you're really the fact that you waited till your mother passed, the fact that I think that the fact that you hired somebody to kind of go, wait a minute, and I need someone to check myself. I love that, and it shows so much responsibility in yourself, and wanting to make sure that you do justice to the story. I'm really intrigued as to where you're gonna go with this process, and I hope that my hope is that it also brings some closure to you, and some forgiveness for your mom and for yourself. Such an interesting project that you're taking on, and I can see the everything you're trying to, it's not just like how do I write a book and how do I make it interesting. You're also processing all your stuff as you're doing it. It's
yeah,
really interesting. It's very courageous of you.
yep, I 100%. In the way of me writing this book, I think it's a way of forgiving my mom, of being able to say, okay, mom, I understand what you went through, because she was brought up in a time where children didn't talk. They were
Mm,
seen, not
yeah.
heard. And she was brought up, and I love my grandmother to death, don't get me wrong, but she was brought up in a family that had some step kids, and my mom was the youngest of all the kids, and it was hard for her to find her own identity, I
Mm-hmm.
think. And she also had loss when when her sister was 18 years old. She died in a car accident, and I think my mom was maybe 15, 16. I don't know the
Mm,
age difference, but that was a huge loss for her, because that was her sister that was closest to her in age. And
yeah.
so, and I know that mom did the best she could. I know that. I know that in my mind, that she did the best she could, and that I understand it's hard when you're a kid, but you, looking back as an adult, you understand why she formed the bonds with the two older sisters, and she did with my younger sister and my sister Karen and I, because she was there. She had time with them, and my dad wasn't around, so those were the ones she bonded to. And so I understand that in my mind, but it's hard when you're working through that, thinking about all the things that were slighted. Even the grandkids. I mean, I have three girls. My sister that's still alive has two boys. And it seemed like she preferred the boys over the girls because we were told, well, they don't have a dad in their life. And I'm like, so you're going to penalize my girls because my husband and I are happily married. That's not right. I mean, I understand the thinking behind it, but not only did it hurt me, but it hurt the girls as well. So
Yeah.
trying to go through and think about all the things that were done wrong or in my mind were done wrong to me, because I read somewhere that our perceptions of what's going on at the time can be totally different from what someone else's perceives it to be. So what we maybe remember as our truth is not maybe not what really happened, but it's our truth and how we remember it. So I learned how to kind of sit back and be a little bit of an observer with my mom. And yeah, you're right. I'm going through the process of forgiving, and I grieved her. And I see that what you said, yes, 100%. I grieved the relationship I didn't have with her, because that made me want to build a relationship that I wanted to have with my mom, with my girls. And I did that.
Well, that's what I was sitting here going back to, what's this here to teach me question, like the gift in that, all that excuse me, the gift in all that is that you sound like you're a pretty awesome mom.
Well,
And
one of the greatest compliments that my oldest daughter actually gave me, she moved clear across country to California to go to school, and her husband did. But I was out there visiting 2 years ago, and she's like, Mama, I don't think of you as my mom. I'm like, what? What? Excuse me, what did you just say? I'm not your mom. I gave birth to you. You may look like your dad, but I still gave birth to you. She said, no, let me finish. And she says, I don't think of you as my mom. I think of you as a friend who happens to be my mom. And I think that's the greatest compliment. And then my middle daughter, she's come around to seeing how much I changed in the last couple of years as well, because something came up when my mom was had fallen and broke her hip and it was in the hospital, and she was saying something that happened in her childhood, and I looked at her and I said, I don't recall this happening, but if it did, I'm sorry. I said, as parents, we all make mistakes. As humans, we make mistakes. And I said, I'm not telling you that it didn't happen because I don't remember it happening. You remember it happening. So all I can do is apologize and move on. I mean, it may not have happened. It may not have happened the way that she said it happened. But I took her truth and took it in and said,
yeah,
okay, if I apologize 100%.
yeah,
And so that was she's been the most difficult one for me to have a relationship with, because the other two are more like me. And so her seeing me say that, hey, you know what? I apologize if something did happen. And
yeah,
then, and I never told her she couldn't have a relationship with my mom either. That's the one thing with all three of my girls. I never told them that, hey, you can't you can't go see your nana. You can't do this. You can't do that. I don't want to be around that toxic place. But you guys, that's your nana. You go love her. You go be with her. And then my youngest daughter calls me her best friend. So, yeah.
very sweet. Well, Melissa, it's been lovely to have you on the show. Thank you for sharing so much of your life, and your vulnerability in which you opened up, and just really appreciate you letting us in. And I wish you all the luck with this book, and more importantly with your healing process and your forgiveness process that this book is here for. And I have no doubt that it'll be very successful. And let us know when you finish it so you can come back on the show and share about it.
Oh, I would love to. And thank you for having me on. I love being able to share, you know, because I know other people are struggling with either relationships with parents or kids. And that way you can break those generational curses and just say, okay, it's time to move on and get out of our
Yeah.
own way to have a successful life.
Yeah. Amen to that. All right, my love. I will put the blog post on the show notes, so definitely go check out Melissa Vera's blog, The Adventures of the Frugal Mom. All right, my love. In today's Instagram world, we very often get the picture-perfect version of events. Melissa's raw honesty gives us a rare glimpse at what it looks like to be a person at work. A person who's working on her healing, working on her mindset, just working on all of it. And what most inspired me about Melissa is how she includes it all. She's using it as part of her process. She's a writer, so she's writing about it, she's sharing about it, she's letting us in. Many times our instinct is to keep this stuff in the closet or to only share it once you've gotten past it, to only show us the breakthrough. But I think there's a beautiful gift in Melissa's process, not just for us who get to be part of her journey, but for herself. It allows her the gift of grace, the gift of knowing she's a work in progress, and that some days her best looks very different than others. It allows her the grace to bring her mess and give it a seat at the table, which allows her the opportunity to fully integrate and love all of herself, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I, for one, am deeply moved by her generosity and courage in sharing so much of herself with us today. You taught this overachieving high performer a thing or two about grace, and for that I am very grateful. Thank you for joining us today. If this episode has inspired you in any way, please don't forget to share it with someone that you love, and it wouldn't hurt if they click follow and leave a review either. I'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Ownership Game with your host, Gary Montalvo. Make sure to like and comment on your favorite podcast platform, as well as subscribe so that you never miss an episode.